If you've done 3, 4, and 5, which most of you have completed, you do not need to read this story again, okay? It's already completed for you. You've already done it. Now, the portion we're going to cover, and a lot of you already have examples inside of your text, okay? Mine's cleared because I've used this a couple of times now, but looking at the plot charting graphic organizer, you guys have talked about plot charts before with a story, right? That's the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action into the resolution. Okay. This story has a very large exposition part of it, doesn't it? It's a very large exposition. It's Nurzan's fight almost through the first part that I gave you, where she actually gets caught wrestling with the boys and we start to see what the characters are like. Okay. Let's talk about a couple of things. This is the part that's already somewhat filled out for you as an example, because I want you to see what I'm looking for from this. Which you have here does not match your story, so no, you cannot just leave it. When does this story take place? When do you all think this story takes place? Okay, so that would be a where, right? With the setting, you're looking at when and where. So I like at their home is one place. That's fine for the where, right, Alex? Okay. What are their names? Could I say Maya and Nurzan's home? Do you guys remember the family's last name? Okay. It is Alatova. You know that whenever at the Alatova home. We know that from when Ibik, the father, signs a permission slip. Okay. So the where is part of the setting, but when does this take place? Does it come right out and say a date? So how are we going to figure that out? What's up, Brooke? Yep, that's what I just covered. I have examples there for you, right, from a different story so that you can see what it is I'm looking for. So you'll have to delete those and put the correct answer. Does that make sense, Brooke? There's an example there that it's not just a quick answer that you put there, that you've got to be detailed. Okay. Looking at the when, how do we figure out when this happened? Because they don't come right out and say it. Okay. What's that? Okay. We could say just during the day, but it happens over several days too, doesn't it? Over several weeks, several months, because mama gets hurt and she has to do a lot of it. What about when they talk about Mr. Subotnick, the custodian? Where did Mr. Subotnick come from? Do you guys remember? Why did he move to the United States? Yes. Hungarian Revolution of 1956 is what he says. Do you guys recall that? Hungarian Revolution of 1956. He's an older man now. Okay. Whenever Maya's talking to him. So we know it's definitely way past 1956. Do you think this story takes place in the 2000s? He says probably. How old would that make Mr. Subotnick? And then he'd still be a custodian into his like 80s or 90s. Well, so 60s isn't bad because it would actually put him past the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, right? But it would also only make him like in his 20s or 30s. Yeah, I think in the 1980s and 90s is a pretty good guess. Yep, 1980s and 1990s is a pretty good guess, using his age as kind of a reference point. Okay. Yeah, said he had gray hair, so we can use that as he's an older fella, right? So when did it take place? You know, during the 1980s, 1990s. Do we know specifically? Is that okay that we don't know specifically? Yeah, but we can use details in the story to figure it out. Okay. Looking at where else it took place. At the Alatova home, where else did it take place? Okay. At their school, right? Where else? Anywhere else? What country did it take place in? Right. I think it would be good to list that at their American school, right? Or you could just have it as a separate thing as in America. Now, in describing the surroundings, I gave you an example. Now, that's the seventh grade example. They had the eighth grade story example. So I gave them an idea of what the surroundings would look like for your story. You don't have the surroundings for your story there. That is literally from a story called Seventh Grade by Gary Soto. We read it last year if you were in my classroom. Okay. How would you describe the surroundings of our characters in this? How did you guys picture everything? Do you guys try to visualize the story when you're reading it? Like what the character looks like? Okay. So you imagined a town like 20 years ago, so you knew it would be in like the past, right? Did you guys see the school as like this brand new school, an older school? Okay. So not a brand new school, something a little bit older. Okay. Um, do you think that the Alatoba home was a home? Do you think it was an apartment? It was an apartment. How do you know that? Okay. She was cleaning houses around there. That's right. Remember when they first picked up Nurzan and Papa was angry and it says that he flew up to the building really fast. And that's where they were at their home was a building. Yeah. So they do give us an indication that we're looking at like an apartment. Do you think they had lots of space? Okay, they had to share a room. Okay, those are details that you want to use in your description. Does that make sense? When you look at the main characters, describe them. Tell me how you see them. Tell me what they look like in your mind. All right. Does that give you an idea what I'm looking for? And again, if you need to make changes, that's perfectly fine. You can unsubmit it if you've already turned it in. Looking at conflicts, you have a single sentence to describe a conflict. If you had me last year, do I want more than a single sentence to describe a conflict? You want to be descriptive. You want to be descriptive every time. Have more than a single sentence. Okay? Have more than a single sentence. What conflicts do we see in this story? You got to come up with at least three. Good. Nurzan getting into a fight with a boy that's teasing him. Describe how this impacts our characters. You can go farther by saying Nurzan gets into a fight. Maya has to come translate for him. Papa comes to get them from school. Okay. What other conflicts do we see? Okay. The traditional attachment to their home. How does that affect the characters? Yeah, so one of the big conflicts we see is Maya being kind of thrown around by the boys, right? And the dad doesn't understand why they think that's okay because of their different traditional beliefs, their cultural beliefs. Okay. Good. Good. So that links even back up to our conflict number one. You see how descriptive we can be all of a sudden? What's the major conflict we see in the story? See, that's what we think that conflict has to be something that is like violence. But conflict is anything that affects the characters. Okay, why did she get her mother's bracelet? Okay. So what's the major what conflict does that stem to? What is it Maya wants more than anything? That's it. The major conflict in this is the spring fling, right? Does that make sense? The major conflict in this one is definitely the spring fling. You can have the mother's leg as one of your conflicts. You've got to have the major one, though, of the spring fling. The mother breaking her leg has a huge impact on Maya. That's perfect. Okay, but the major conflict goes from her getting the permission slip to Nurzan helping her get it signed and on down. Okay. Questions about the conflicts? Should these be with complete sentences? Yes. They should be detailed. Okay. Like I said, I'm trying to get through this so we can give you guys some time as well to work. So the climax in the story. What is the highest point of your story? Very often what people want to put here is Nurzan's fight. The problem is Nurzan's fight is at the beginning. That means the climax would be in the beginning and everything else would be in the following action. But that's not the case. Brooke did mention part of the climax just a moment ago. What is the highest point? Think of it this way. When does the major conflict start to get resolved? See, but the major conflict there is that Mama broke her leg, right? What's the major conflict in our story again? Okay, that's part of the climax. What's the major conflict in this story? That's it. That's the climax right there. From the time that Nurzan helps her to the bracelet, right? Everyone starts to accept that Maya is a teenager and she needs to be able to go and be social. Does that make sense? That's our climax. As it says, who is involved? Who are the characters that are involved in that? It's really just about all of them, right? Why did it happen? Be descriptive there. Describe how it is presented. That means you want to describe how the story looked from the time that Nurzan starts the climax until Mama gives her the bracelet. Okay? Are you guys starting to understand? I want this to be detailed. Someone should be able to pick this up and understand the story without having to read the story because you've already done it. That's what I want to be able to do when it comes down to it, okay? Looking at falling action. This is probably where you're going to start to see the dance. You start to see the climax get resolved because they go to the dance. Who has to go with her to the dance? Nurzan, right? This is her favorite chaperone is Nurzan. Okay, that's why it's called My Favorite Chaperone. Okay,